Mr. Tchoulkov has been a member of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs since his graduation from Moscow State Institute of International Relations in 1969. He's worked abroad in Kenya and Thailand. He's been in Vienna, and at the United Nations. All of his responsibilities since at least 1975 have been in the area of multilateral economic relations, and he's presently serving with responsibilities in the area of economics and social affairs at the Russian mission to the United Nations. So he'll emphasize in his initial remarks this evening the economic conditions in Russia, which are of profound importance to us as well as to them, and to how that plays out in his role at the United Nations. And although it's so easy to be preoccupied with Iraq, the simple, straightforward point is no bilateral relationship is more important to the United States than that with Russia. Certainly the policy of the United States is to wish Russia well, to hope that it succeeds marvelously in its economic development, and that the United States and Russia might proceed together on a variety of international issues. Certainly our security interests, our national interests coincide with your well-being. So we're deeply interested in your topic. At the same time, it's fascinating the role that the Russians are playing at the United Nations today with respect to the Iraqi issue, and the leadership which they and others are playing in trying to have a policy toward Iraq which appears to include the possibilities of accommodation. But the ambassador has agreed that during the Q&A period, he'll come to grips with that and other questions. The topic, as I say, will have to do with Russian economic development. It's my enormous pleasure to present to you Ambassador Nikolai Tchoulkov.
Mr. President, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Great pleasure, I would like to mention the third time. That is really great pleasure and honor to be here tonight. Speaking frankly, last year I was passing by to Washington from New York and did not have a chance to visit your city. This time I came a few minutes earlier and managed to drive around the city, and I was so much impressed by the beauty, and I do congratulate you on living in such a lovely place, not only in the United States, but in the world. It was mentioned already that Ambassador Lavrov was intending very much to join you this night, but unfortunately, because unscheduled, very, very urgent and important topic was supposed to be discussed, which was discussing today in the Security Council, he was unable to be here. I guess we shall touch upon that very important subject a little bit later. I guess you have some questions or you have some comments, and I will try my best to answer them. But as far as my main topic is concerned, I would like to say a few words about the Russian economic diplomacy in general, of course with some references to the economic situation in my country this time, about the relationship between Russia and the United Nations with regard to that economic aspects, because from the very beginning I would like to mention that that path of economic reforms which we have started going a couple of years ago, in our view, is irreversible. And we are trying our best to use not only our domestic facilities for doing that, but we also share the experience of our partners all around the world, including the United Nations. From the very beginning, I would like to mention that since the early 90s, Russia has been pursuing the irreversible and firm policy designed to abandon the centralized economic system and to establish a market economy. One must say that by now we have made a great progress along this path. The system of centralized planning and distribution of production has been completely dismantled in our country. Any sort of state interference with the economy is accomplished mainly through indirect methods. Freedom of the manufacturer of goods, no matter what form of property, is guaranteed. A cardinal change in the balance of forces as regards types of property has occurred. The share of the non-state sector in the economy is already about 70%. The GDP structure has become significantly lighter, similarly to that of industrially developed countries. The service sector share in it has exceeded already 50%. The elimination of foreign trade monopoly has now been completed. There are no restrictions on external economic activities, irrespective of forms of property, except, of course, for those universally accepted and related to maintaining security, safeguarding the health, etc. The newly established private business and the remaining state-owned foreign trade companies, the number of the latter and the state share in them have been declining steadily, carry out their external economic activity based on market principles, proceeding from strictly commercial considerations. Over the last few years, a free cost factor pricing system has been in place in the country, except, of course, for state-regulated prices on goods and services of natural monopolies. The scale of state subsidizing has become notably more restricted. It has acquired a surgical nature, focusing mainly on strategically crucial projects. The Russian government has been pursuing an aggressive policy of combating monopolies and encouraging free competition. There are signs of real improvement in the dynamics of the industrial production in Russia. If in the first 9 months of the year 1996 it declined 4.5%, last year we have 1.9% increase of industrial output. In fact, nowadays almost half of the largest sectors of the industry is increasing its production. Of course, the percentage is not high, but at the same time, taking into account those couple of years of declining, it is very important for us, and we do believe that this is the real beginning of our growth. Russia has recently made substantial progress towards improving its investment attractiveness. For the first time, as you know, Russia recognized as a reliable borrower in the world financial markets. The proof is the success of the Eurobond issues, entry into the Paris and London clubs of creditors. As of July 1st of last year, the accumulated foreign investments into the Russian economy surplus $17.8 billion, and almost $5 billion are from the United States investments. These days, more than 3,000 Russian-American joint ventures are registered within the State Register of Russia. The joint ventures operate in the sectors of oil, upstream and downstream industry, engineering industry, defense conversion, light industry, agriculture and food processing, consumer goods industry, and transportation. I do have some figures reflecting the trade between our two countries. Probably they are not very fresh one, I should say, but let me make a reference on them. In 1996, the trade volume between Russia and the United States was about $7.5 billion. The United States is on the third place after Ukraine and Germany as the main trade partners of the Russian Federation. I should say that we do have a lot of goods coming from the United States. Unfortunately, the list of them could and should be increased, and we do hope that in the coming years that very developments will occur. With your permission, I would like to make a few references of the results of the economic performance in Russia last year. The situation is such that we are trying to identify even small achievements, even few figures which do prove the fact that the development is successful. I would like to make a few references, as I mentioned. Unemployment. During last year, it decreased from 3.4% up to 2.8%. Most important thing for us is, of course, inflation. The government succeeded in keeping it within the very definite limits, and last year we calculated it as about 11% only. And it is very, very important for us because that very figure is 2 times less than the year 1996. The volume of external trade remain almost the same as the previous year. It's about $138 billion. I would like to mention that the trade surplus is rather positive for us. It's about $20 billion. I'm not intending to mention only about those achievements. We still have a number of problems, and the government does see them and intends to deal with them very seriously. First of all, I would like to mention that unfortunately we don't have yet the budget adopted by the Parliament. We still hope that this could happen rather soon, and we are waiting for the fourth reading in the Parliament. Although that very delay, of course, does influence the economic situation and economic development in general. Another very serious problem, which is very, very crucial for us, is taxation and tax payments. Again, the government does understand the situation. Last year, we succeeded in collecting only about 66% of taxes when expected. It's one of the most urgent and vital problems these days for Russia, and the government is intending to be very much involved in dealing with that. I shouldn't say that that financial crisis which took place started in the Southeast Asia and touched upon many financial centers all around the world, missed Russia. Since Russia is one of the participants, one of the actors of the world's economic life, of course, that crisis touched upon our economy as well, and we did have rather serious consequences of that. At the same time, the economic, I should say, facilities and possibilities of the country is such that the government, together with the central bank, was succeeded in doing that in a rather successful way, and they succeeded in making the consequences as less serious as possible. What about the view of those vital tasks ahead of the government this year? Number one, the necessity of keeping inflation in very limited scope is there, so the government intends to have it within the limits of 5 to 8%. Taking into account the experience of last year, we are sure that if we do not have any unexpected problems in Russia or in international financial markets, we shall be able to fulfill this target. Then another very serious problem for us is elimination of non-monetary, I should say, payments or mutual payments between enterprises and companies. Then we have to be to provide more transparency in the system of state financing. Land reform is another very serious and vital problem for us. This very question has been considering for some time in the Parliament. Unfortunately, we do not have yet, as we call it in the United Nations, consensus on that very subject, but I'm sure the life will demand to take a decision in the nearest time. Speaking about the measures taken by the government with regard to the foreign investors, I would like to mention that Prime Minister Chernomyrdin became the chairman of the recently created State Commission for Protection of the Rights of the Investors on the Russian financial and stock markets. The Commission is entitled to review claims of foreign partners in the investment sphere, a special department for resolving conflicts situation and that the foreign investors may face while working on the Russian market was created within the Russian Center for Promoting Foreign Investments, which operates under the auspices of the Ministry of Economy of the Russian Federation. While making some comments on the situation in Russia based on our sources of information, I would like to take this opportunity to make a very short reference to the article published a couple of months ago, by the president of the Russian-American Chamber of Commerce, Dr. Palmieri, who wrote the following: on the domestic front, things finally seem to be going the right way. The income gap between Russia's rich and poor narrowed for the first time in 5 years. Industrial production for the first time in 6 years registered an increase. The government made a dent in paying off pensions arrears. The Russian stock market continued to soar at a breakneck pace. Privatization of the largest monopolies went as scheduled. Russia's foreign reserves were up. Yeltsin signed an important decree protecting the rights of the investors in Russia's financial and stock markets. Of significance also was a strengthened anti-corruption campaign by the government. So this is just a view of your countrywoman who just tried to explain in very short manner the situation in my country. Coming back to the principal aspects of the economic diplomacy, I would like to mention that in a few situations, the Russian diplomacy is making efforts to, on one hand, broaden and deepen the external economic activity of Russia's various regions, and on the other, guide and monitor the expansion of independent regional ties from the federal level. The Consultative Council at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs helps to address numerous issues relating to Federation subjects' foreign economic activity. Probably you are aware of the fact that in the past, each even remote area did not have any right to get direct economic relationship with any kind of foreign partners. Now the situation is absolutely different, and each subject of the Russian Federation does have the right to establish and to conduct such kind of economic relationship. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs is well aware of the importance in the present situation of multilateral regulation mechanism of worldwide economic relationship. Russia already is a full and equal member of influential institutions such as the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank Group, and the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. The Russian side also follows a policy of enhancing cooperation with the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, a policy envisaging the country's membership in this body as the ultimate goal. Joining the World Trade Organization is yet another priority for my country. Another important segment of the Russian economic diplomacy is a strategy aimed at the abolishment of the direct and covert discriminatory restrictions and limitations on trade stipulated in the legislation of a number of our Western partners, those still in force since the Cold War. Unfortunately, efforts to this end have led to no results, either in multilateral or in bilateral formats. One of the reasons behind that is, in particular, Russia's present status of a country with economy in transition. Russia's transition status is grounds for the industrialized nations to apply to her those legal norms which have been elaborated to regulate their relationship with the states that used to have command administrative economic systems. Developed mainly in the Cold War period, they are of discriminatory nature and affect our interest rather strongly. We believe that it is high time our partners face the truth and acknowledge that at the bottom, the Russian economy follows market rules and has a structure fairly close to that of industrialized nations. Saying that, I just mean the fact that, unfortunately, not only in the so-called old world, but here in this very continent, still we are not recognized as a country with a market-oriented economy. Really, it's a pity, because we do believe that the understanding of that will provide a mutually beneficial approach. And I do hope that this could happen soon, since our partners on the G8 do reflect the understanding of the situation, in my view, rather openly in the communique of the Denver summit of the 8th, which took place here in the United States in June last year. With your permission, I would like just to make a very short reference on the communique itself. So the communique says, continuing the important steps we have taken, the Denver summit of the 8th marks a new and deeper participation by Russia in our efforts. Russia has taken bold measures to complete an historic transformation into a democratic state with a market economy. Cooperation to integrate Russia's economy into the global economic system represents one of our most important priorities. We welcome the understanding reached between Russia and the chairman of the Paris Club on the basis for Russian participation, and look forward to the Paris Club and Russian finalizing an agreement in the near future. It has been done already. We support the goal of early Russian accession to the World Trade Organization on the basis of conditions generally applicable to newly acceding members. We also look forward to continued Russian progress toward accession to the OECD using the potential of the recently created liaison commission between Russia and that organization. Now I'd like to draw attention to some points with regard to the support provided by the United Nations to the economic reform in my country. Creation on a multilateral level of conditions, proposals to a practical support for economic reform in Russia, a transition to a market economy at the lowest social cost possible, and an effective integration into the world economy constitute one of the major goals as regards our participation in UN system, economic bodies and organizations. We also attach great importance to the elaboration at the UN of conceptual approaches and the search for practical ways of addressing global issues such as promotion of sustainable development, including such components as economic growth, population, environment, social justice, etc., energy supply, foreign debt, globalization of world commodity, services and capital markets, informalization of societies, etc. Russia aims to make its own constructive contribution to attaining a consensus on a new partnership of states in the post-bloc era, to forwarding multilateralism in economic, social, and environmental spheres, to hammering out principles of United Nations cooperation in these areas with other partners, including Bretton Woods institutions, WTO, and the non-governmental organizations. One should single out the following areas among priority spheres of cooperation between Russia and the United Nations agencies and institutions. Development of a modern market infrastructure, exchange trade, stock markets, banking, etc. Support for small and medium-scale businesses, encouragement of national entrepreneurship, customer protection. Development of exports and new forms of international economic cooperation, special economic zones, technological parks, etc. Attraction of foreign investments, carrying out military conversion, enhancement of social protection of the population in the cause of reform, public institutions adaptation and capacity building in the period of reform. I would like just to give you some examples of our cooperation with different bodies of the UN system. Russia's cooperation with the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, has backed up notably. UNDP country program for Russia adopted in September 1995 communicated a more comprehensive and integral nature to this cooperation. Translated into the program are the priority directions of the national government program for social economic development for the years 95-97. Currently underway in Russia are UNDP projects for assisting Russia in joining the World Trade Organization, for encouraging foreign investments, improving financial management, speeding up military conversion, developing small and medium-sized businesses, setting up so-called business incubators, streamlining the Moscow public transportation infrastructure, promoting environmentally sustainable development of the Barents Sea region, supporting the activity of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation. Projects are in the works for the establishment at the Russian Ministry of Economy of an information system for economic decision-making, support for democracy and governance, development of traditional economies in Yakutia, industrial capacity building of the Vologda region, development of a program for encouraging foreign investment in the Primorye territory in the far east part of Russia, providing technical assistance to a number of regions in Bashkiria, Ingushetia, and many others. So I'm trying just to demonstrate the activity which is carried out in Russia throughout the territory by the assistance of UNDP. Investment fora for Bashkiria, Kalmykia, Komi, Tatarstan, Yakutia, and many other regions have been held under the auspices of the United Nations Industrial Development Organizations, UNIDA. Preparations for similar fora intended to promote and encourage foreign investments for a number of regions in the Far East, southern Siberia, the Urals, southern Russia, and are currently underway. Russia's cooperation with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe develops progressively. A considerable potential of assistance to reform has been accumulated within the framework of the Commission. In particular, it is at the ECE that numerous standards regulating trade relations between Eastern and Western countries are elaborated. International environmental conventions are developed and implemented. Guidelines and methodologies for developing cooperation in the sphere of industry, scientific research, and technology are issued. Brought to life in the programming activity of the Commission are provisions made in decisions of various European fora in what regards restructuring industries, introduction of new technologies, development of a transportation infrastructure, of key sectors of the economy, and social protection of the population. A number of key projects, transportation networks, electronic bookkeepings in international trade, and some others, are directly linked to relevant goals defined in governmental programs of the Russian government. Russia has been most active in employing the analytical capacity and the expertise of the United Nations Conference for Trade and Development, UNCTAD, in particular of the Associated Commission for Investment, Technologies and Related Financial Matters, the UN Commission on Population, which is dealing with demographic analysis issue, UN Statistical Commission, improvement of statistical methodologies, introduction of a unified system for national calculations, and many other groups, including the expert group for governance and finance and the UN expert group for macroeconomic forecasting, the so-called LINK project. The social cluster of issues is in the focus of our cooperation with the International Organization of Labour, assistance in developing employment policies and labor relations strategies, concepts of social partnership, providing training and extension courses with the United Nations Children's Fund, protection of the interests of children and mothers at this stage of transition, respect for the rights of children. Russia's cooperation with the United Nations in the sphere of environment is intended to address specific ecological problems faced by the country. In particular, our cooperation with UNEP and participation in various environmental conventions under the auspices of the UN not only pursue the goal of restraining unreasonable and wasteful activity affecting the environment, but also are meant to recruit qualified expertise and to use available international experiences to combat desertification, drought, deforestation, water and air pollution, as well as to enhance efforts for soil restoration, improving drinking water supply, safety of transportation of hazardous cargoes and waste materials, and many, many other things. Many of the above-mentioned projects not only aim at promoting a search for solutions to crucial problems of the present stage of Russia's development, but are likely to contribute to the creation of conditions which would increase the interest of prospective investors in Russian economy. We hope that the business world's better knowledge of additional advantages provided by these opportunities will communicate renewed energy to the search for new forms of cooperation in the Russian UN system business triangle. A wider involvement of private capital in the projects implemented in Russia with UN assistance may turn out to be a promising endeavor beneficial to all the participants in such a trilateral partnership. In this regard, I would like to just mention that in December last year, my ambassador made his presentation at the American Business Council in New York, which is very much involved in supporting UN activity. And while delivering his speech, he drew the attention of the participants to the fact that private business started being more and more involved in UN activity in general. We do have a number of very good examples in activity which is carried out within UN in supporting private business all over the world. A number of resolutions were adopted by General Assembly, by UNDP, by UNIDA, by UNCTAD. There are very positive practical activity carried out by these organizations with regard to the small and medium-sized enterprises, development of modern market infrastructure. Just I would like to mention that, for instance, the main resources of UNICEF is, I mean, 1/3 of that resources comes from the private sector. I cannot miss the fact that it was well known and everybody was commenting that the decision of Ted Turner to provide to the United Nations $1 billion for realization of different kind of projects in humanitarian and environmental spheres. By saying that, I would like just to draw attention of your community to that very aspect, and by finishing my main part of the presentation, once again I would like to thank you very much indeed for your attention. Thank you very much for your hospitality, and I'll try my best to answer your possible questions.
Well, we certainly thank you very much for the overview of both the Russian economy and its relationship to the UN. Explain the coherence of your geopolitical and economic strategies toward Turkey.
Well, thank you very much for this question. It's really a very interesting one. And the answer will be not simple, because for such a very, very complicated, I should say, question, there cannot be simple answers. But in my personal view, the situation is following. It is very, I should say, dangerous to mix two absolutely different things. Number one, the economic relations between two nations. And speaking about the economic relationship between Russia and Turkey, in my view, we should not limit these relations only by these two countries, because the development could be such that it will have the relationship and influence on the economic development and relationship with other countries of the region. As far as the anti-missile system for Cyprus are concerned, I would not make, as I mentioned, direct links between these two aspects, because that very arms supply has been, decided, that very deal has been decided some time ago. And as far as the military supply is concerned, it's a simple example of trade relations. I would be able to make some references and to give you some examples about the American sales of arms to other countries, which also could create some problems for neighbors. And as far as the Russian supply of that Russian anti-missile or anti-aircraft systems are concerned, this is number one, the simple trade deal. The other thing is that it has been done on the request of the Cyprus government. We did not come to them and just tell them, look, you should buy it. It's their request. If Russia rejected to do that, could I ask you the question, who would supply that kind of anti-aircraft system to Cyprus? Who would get a deal? United States, British? I don't know who else, probably Italy. Who else? Probably France, I'm sorry, yeah. So I'm sorry, but we were chosen by the Cyprus government. I don't know why, probably because of the price. But speaking frankly, these days the price is not very important for buyers, because if in the past, about 20, 30 years ago, you could sell something at a very cheap price, now the buyers would like to have quality products. And if they decided to have that Russian weaponry, since that's satisfied with their standards of quality, it's fine.
What progress are you making with respect to applying the rule of law in the economic sphere?
Well, it's a very complicated, I should say, sphere of activity in Russia these days, because, no, not because the government does not wish to do that, but simply because we have started this very activity only a few years ago. And because of that, as I was trying just to demonstrate, we are trying just to obtain the experience of other countries, of international organizations in that very field as well. Yes, we do still have some problems with that regard. But at the same time, the developments are there too. If in the past you cannot have any deal with any Russian or former Soviet Union company without Moscow, now it's in the past. Now every region does have the right to establish economic relations with any foreign country, with any foreign companies. More of that, since the capital, I should say, is sometimes rather slow in adopting the laws and decrees which are required to have that situation normal, the regions themselves provide specific conditions on the territory of that very region which are rather attractive for foreign business. And if we are speaking about, let's say, Far Eastern regions or some regions in the middle part of Russia, there are some evidences and figures that foreign companies, including American companies, to welcome that kind of developments, and they are satisfied in providing, in having their representation and their companies in Nizhny Novgorod, in Vladivostok and Primorye, in Saratov and some other places, in St. Petersburg.
Would you comment on home ownership and land reform?
Well, I mentioned that land reform is one of the very important and vital problems for Russia these days. And you're absolutely right, I guess, in interesting in this very subject, because this very question has been disputed in the parliament for some time already. The question is that during the Soviet time, more than 70 years, we did not have any private land, private property, I should say. And now the question is that we should adopt a law which provides an opportunity to sell the land. Those in the parliament who are not in favor of that approach, and at the time being, this is the majority of the parliament, they are saying that, look, if you adopt this very law, it means that foreign companies immediately will buy all lands of Russia. At the same time, we know the experience of other countries, including yours and Western European countries, that only private property on land would be able to provide the required speed of economic development in the rural areas. So my understanding is that, yes, we are still considering this very matter. We have had to postpone the adoption of that law. As I mentioned, the land reform is one of the vital tasks for the government's activity this year. And I do hope that sooner or later, but I do hope it will be sooner, we shall have that kind of decree with kind of law, and we shall be able to develop in this very field, in this very sphere, as a normal democratic country as well.
How would you describe what is at the core of your nation's relationships with Bosnia on one hand and Iraq on the other?
Well, I guess that very main topic started being discussed with regard to Iraq and some other hot places. From one side, it is very simple to answer a question, because I have not to think over about something or just to try to imagine something. From the other side, it's not so easy, because I have to make some references probably to the history a couple of years ago. You mentioned that event with regard to Iraq of 1991. You remember that at that time, Russia supported the operation against the terror country. These days, from the very beginning, we were against any military operation, and we are still considering it's absolutely unnecessary. In our view, the situation is absolutely different. If in the past we did have an aggression against another country, Iraq against Kuwait, and the aggressor should be punished without any doubts. These days, we are speaking about absolutely different situation. And speaking frankly, I'm a little bit surprised by reading in local newspapers some comments that, well, Russia and the United States are just divided on the Iraqi question. They do not have absolutely different approach. It's not correct in my view, because generally speaking, both of us, we are in favor of achieving such a position, such a level of development of this situation, when the United Nations and the world in general are sure that Iraq does not have any weapons of mass destruction. The only difference is the approach to reach this very goal. Our distinguished American colleagues were in favor of a military operation. But let us ask ourselves, what kind of achievements could be reached by military operations? If someone is trying to occupy a country, it's one solution. As far as I understand, the United States were not going to do that. They were going just to bomb some specific areas in that very country in order to destroy that very weapons of mass destruction. I'm not sure whether that kind of methods could be successful, because from one side, if such a weapon is there, are you sure that it is put on the ground level? Number two, if by bombing you are able to destroy them, what about the innocent population, not only in this very country but in some other countries, if that very chemical weapons could flow over territory of other countries? So our position was the following. So let us try our best to be sure that there is no weapons of mass destruction in this very country. Let us keep that under permanent control. And we believe that to achieve these goals, there is only one way: to have the access to all places which should be reached by UN specialists. We are happy that majority of the world supported the position of those who were in favor of this approach, and I guess our distinguished partners from United States and Great Britain also are just working together now in these days in the Security Council in working out a resolution trying to support the agreement reached by the UN Secretary General the other day. And let us hope that we shall be able to reach that goal. I mean, to be sure that there is no weapons of mass destruction there. If there is any, so let's liquidate it by getting the access to all places, all palaces, all places all around the country.
The question was, will there be an inspection team at Yekaterinburg?
Yekaterinburg. Well, speaking frankly, I'm afraid I will be unable to answer your question because, well, I can imagine that there are some chemical plants or laboratories in Yekaterinburg. That very big city is situated in the Urals, in the middle part of Russia. It's very industrially developed part of Russia. There are a lot of military defense production plants there, including chemical plants, I'm sure. If you believe that there is any necessity to have any kind of UN inspection on that very chemical plant, I don't think that there is any problem, since United Nations will take such kind of decision. Because as you are aware, we do have the agreement with the United States on joint inspection on different military spots in our countries. And that kind of inspections are carried out regularly in accordance with that very agreement. And as far as I understand, we do not have any problems. I read in mass media that a couple of weeks ago, some Russian military men visited the United States and checking some nuclear submarines, if I'm not wrong. And another group of American specialists visited Russia and just inspecting some other military spaces there. So I don't see any problem.
Connect your areas of prosperity with your severe problems, such as inability to pay your soldiers.
Well, thank you very much for your question. Really, it's very, very important one and vital one, I should say, the book itself. Yes, the other day it was a meeting of the members of the cabinet. And President Yeltsin took part in the first part of it. Some observers noticed that he left that very meeting during the interval, and they tried to understand why he did so. As far as I understand, he did get very urgent other arrangements, including the meeting with the Ukrainian President Leonid Kuchma at that very day. Yes, he mentioned at the very beginning of his speech that he is not satisfied with the performance of the government during last year with regards to the economic performance, despite the fact at the same time he mentioned that there are some achievements. He did not announce that reshuffle of the cabinet at the very moment. It was announced a few days later. As far as I understand, just seeing those figures, I mean, 3 personalities who were dismissed, I can imagine that the president is not satisfied with the relationship among the members, or Russia with the members of CIS, and Vice Prime Minister Mr. Serov was dismissed, who was dealing especially with that very aspect. New Vice Prime Minister to be in charge with the CIS affairs have been appointed. It is Mr. Ivan Rybkin, who was until the very last moment the Secretary of the Security of the Security Council of Russia. Before that, he was the Speaker of the Parliament. Two other ministers, Minister of Transport and Minister of Education. Yeah, and those deputies were appointed. But speaking frankly, my personal view is that the president decided. I'm sure he did have some reasons for that. But in my personal view, the personalities are not the main instrument or mechanism. I'm changing of personalities, not the only or the main mechanism for changing the situation. We do have a lot of problems, and unfortunately we shall have them for the time being in future. And this is not because we are not trying to do the best, not because we do not know what should be done, but I guess the reason is very simple. Just imagine, now it's 1998. Only less than 7 years have passed since the moment when such a huge country started absolutely new way of life. This is not just to, I'm sorry, to change your wife. It's absolutely more complicated problem. Anyway, I'm sure, not only because I'm Russian, but speaking frankly, I'm sure because of that potential which we do have as far as the people are concerned, as far as the natural resources, the technologies, at least the relationship with some other countries, including the United States. All those factors will help us in passing this very way in the rather good speed.
We'd like to thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for what I think has been extraordinarily informative. It's been an enjoyable evening. I'm just very, very sorry that we couldn't have stayed an hour longer, but it's been the time we've had has been
only or the main mechanism for changing the situation. We do have a lot of problems, and unfortunately we shall have them for the time being in future. And this is not because we are not trying to do the best, not because we do not know what should be done, but I guess the reason is very simple. Just imagine, now it's 1998. Only less than 7 years have passed since the moment when such a huge country started absolutely new way of life. This is not just to, I'm sorry, to change your wife. It's absolutely more complicated problem. Anyway, I'm sure, not only because I'm Russian, but speaking frankly, I'm sure because of that potential which we do have as far as the people are concerned, as far as the natural resources, the technologies, at least the relationship with some other countries, including the United States. All those factors will help us in passing this very way. Only or the main mechanism for changing the situation. We do have a lot of problems, and unfortunately we shall have them for the time being in future. And this is not because we are not trying to do the best, not because we do not know what should be done, but I guess the reason is very simple. Just imagine, now it's 1998. Only less than 7 years have passed since the